Aileen Wuornos hit the road when she was 15 years old, and soon after, she would become one of America's most notorious serial killers. Let's take a look at a clip right now that outlines this time in her life.
So at 15, she hit the road and earned her living prostituting.
When she lived on the road, she truly lived on the road. She didn't have nowhere to go.
I think most people in the neighborhood were probably happy that she was gone. It sounds bad now, but she didn't have that many friends anyway.
Aileen Wuornos would spend the next 2 decades trying to find a place to call home, even as her life spiraled more and more out of control.
So a lot happened during this time that we need to unpack, because a lot happened before she became a murderer, but I think that when she hits the road, this for me marks sort of the point of no return in her life, because she has accepted the fact that she is not going to have a traditional life. So she's a professional prostitute. She's a professional streetwalker. Yep. And like we talked about before, she's been doing this since she was 11 years old. She's very familiar. She begins to make somewhat of a living, but this is a difficult time. During this time, her brother dies. So that was the closest person to her. He dies of throat cancer.
21 years old.
21 years old. And that absolutely sends her on a tailspin. And then shortly after, she gets married for a minute.
Yeah,
it's such
a minute.
Yeah,
much older man.
Much older man. I think they were married for about 4 months and they got divorced because he alleged that she beat him with a cane.
His own cane.
With his own cane, which is particularly devious.
Yeah.
You know, that's sinister. But so people said that she got married to, she found this John that sort of picked her up on the highway and ended up getting married to him because she was looking for stability after the death of her brother. And they actually went home and visited some of her friends, and she was showing off her ring and how happy she was, but clearly it was just a facade just to make her feel a little bit more stable.
Yeah, I think the major theme in Eileen's life is abandonment. And I think that's what she was so scared of. You know, her mother had abandoned her, her brother, you know, not willingly abandoned her, her grandparents kicked her out. And I think, you know, when she left on the road, she was just looking so desperately for love or somebody to, you know, take care of her. And clearly she didn't find it in this guy. And I think what was almost ironic is that, you know, all she wanted was to be loved and appreciated, but then she had all these violent outbursts and did things like, you know, prostituting herself when she was 11 that alienated her and isolated her.
Yeah, she knows she wants these connections, but she also doesn't know how to control her outbursts, her temper, and then she gets really frustrated when other people don't put up with it, and when it doesn't lead to any sort of lasting relationships.
Yeah.
So this is also a weird time in her life when she's on the road because there isn't a lot of record here. She commits some petty crimes here and there, but nothing super major. But it's about, you know, close to 2 decades of a little bit of mystery. You know, she doesn't leave a lot of record of what she was doing, who she was hanging out with. It doesn't sound like she had a lot of friends. But after some time, she meets Tyria Moore, and her whole life changes.
Love of her life.
She goes by Ty, and yes, this is a girl, and this is, as far as we know, one of Eileen's, and she goes by Lee, first same-sex relationships, and a lot has been made of this same-sex relationship, which I want to talk about with you. Why do you think we make so much of the fact that Aileen and Tyria had this bond?
They met at a gay bar. I think in...
Really, it was a gay bar.
Yeah, in Daytona, I think.
They were in Florida.
Called Zodiac. Exactly, Zodiac Killer, but that was happening sort of around the same time.
Yep.
You know, people have speculated that Aileen was, and again, I hate to put labels on people, but bisexual, because she did have a lot of heterosexual relationships. And I think, you know, clearly if she was frequenting a gay bar,
maybe she was looking for a gay relationship.
Yeah, I think, you know, maybe she had an idea about, I think she already had such animosity for men that there was probably something comforting. I mean, Ty was a lesbian.
Oh, yeah. She's a huge dyke. Like, literally, she is a literal huge dyke. I don't like her, and we'll get into that later, but yes, she is. We'll say it, sure. Amir's there in the corner. He's just like, whatever. I said it. She's a dyke. I'm a dyke. We're all dykes. Dykes are us.
There we go.
All right. So go on a little bit about this relationship with Ty.
It became, well, it was Eileen's first real love, and I think that's what makes it so tragic. And they, moved in together. They were living sort of at different motels, bouncing around. And a lot of their relationship apparently was based on their mutual alcoholism.
Yeah, it was not based a lot on sex.
Apparently there wasn't much.
A lot of sex. Yeah. Lesbian bed death struck early for them.
But the beer. Getting together.
Yeah, so you had two people who were alcoholics, two people who didn't have a lot of money. Ty was a maid, but she wasn't really bringing in that much money. I would go on record saying I think she's a lazy piece of shit. And Aileen was
she was and she was walking the streets, prostituting herself to provide this lifestyle for her girlfriend who she loved so much. And this is my personal opinion, so whatever. But I think that Ty possibly had quite a lot to do with why Aileen committed the murders.
Yeah, so it was a love affair. It seems like they locked eyes. They really bonded. The story goes that they shut themselves into a motel room for the weekend, and they only came out for food. And it was just this great love that Aileen had never known before.
Yeah,
she'd had relationships, like you said, with men, but not to the extent of the emotional connection and the understanding that Ty was willing to show her for all her outbursts. But it began to fizzle out a little bit, and money started getting a little bit tight. And so a lot of people would agree with you in that Aileen started thinking about murder, not necessarily murder, but started getting desperate to keep Ty, because Ty was, saying, getting a little bored. How are we going to keep up this lifestyle? That sort of thing. So let's actually go to a clip right now of Ty's response to the first murder that Aileen committed.
I completely lost it, Lord. Hypnotically entranced in our companionship, so deeply lost in its same-sex relationship, causing me then to do the unthinkable.
On the night of November 30th, 1989, just outside Tampa, Wuornos was picked up by a 51-year-old electronics repairman named Richard Mallory.
He was heading towards Daytona Beach for a weekend of partying. She met him, propositioned him. He said yes. They agreed to have sex.
They parked the car in the woods near I-95 and Route 1 and drank and talked until dawn. It was only then that Wuornos pulled out the .22 caliber handgun she had brought with her and shot Mallory 4 times in the chest and back. After rifling through her victim's pockets and stealing whatever money he had, Wuornos covered his lifeless body with carpet she found nearby and drove away in his car. When she got home, she told Tyra what she had done.
She had told me that she had killed someone, and I didn't believe her because of the way she talked about it. I didn't think she had it in her, really.
So I don't buy Ty's response to the murders at all whatsoever. And that might be because I'm a little bit jaded, and we'll get into my very conflicting feelings of sympathy for Aileen in the next segment. Yeah. But basically, this is the first murder. And following that, from November 1989 until November 1990, Aileen kills 7 men in very similar fashion. Now, she's convicted of 6, but she has said that she killed 7. Some people would even say that she killed more. And yeah, so there isn't a lot of gruesome details that we can get into about these murders. I know on other episodes like the Black Dahlia, we've talked about that a little bit, but these were very pragmatic, desperate killings. She just sort of shot them. She picked them up and she shot them.
And she was very methodical too, which apparently, as a woman, she really paid attention to detail. So she made sure she wiped down all surfaces, and that's why they had such a hard time finding her in the beginning, because she left no prints. She took the license plates off the cars. She stripped the men of their wallets, any identification, watches, rings. So when they found the bodies, they found the cars, it was hard to track them down. I mean, she knew what she was doing. I think the first murder may have been different than the rest. we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but she went on to say that it was self-defense, and the man who actually had a previous conviction
Richard
of
Mallory
rape,
was not, he wasn't a saint.
he'd served time for rape. So she accused him of attempted rape, and, she said he was going to try and kill her, and that he, tied her hands to the steering wheel and
With an electrical wire.
Yeah, and then, she went on into gruesome detail about how he violated her with, like, battery acid in a Visine bottle into her
nether regions. Yeah.
And that she shot him out of self-defense. But then, of course, he had a bunch of cash, she got a car, and she realized that
And other thing is
kind of
that,
works.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that the first murder did sort of awaken something in her. I don't need to be in these compromising positions anymore. Maybe I can take my power back. My whole life since I was 11 years old, my power has been stripped from me, or I have volunteered it to men in exchange for goods and services, a ride here or whatever. And maybe I don't need to do that anymore. Maybe I've had enough. I think that we can absolutely sort of speculate that might have been running through her brain on that first murder. But what's frustrating is that her story doesn't line up with the wounds on him. She says that there was this crazy sort of assault and struggle that happened in this car, but really what we see from the exit wounds on his body and into the car, the back seat behind him, that he was sitting down in the car next to her when he was shot.
I think he was fully clothed.
Yeah,
some of the victims were fully clothed, some were half naked.
Yeah.
I think one of the victims too, it said it appeared he'd been like rolling to, get away because he was on the ground, he'd been shot.
He had grass on his back or something like that. Yeah, but it was hard for the police to track her down, but they did have some leads, and there was a sketch that went up in a local newspaper of Aileen and Ty, who had been seen with regards to some suspicious activity related to these murders, and police started to put together that they had a serial killer on their hands. The crimes were so similar.
Yeah.
She literally had an MO so quickly because she, again, very pragmatic, very methodical in how she was killing and finding these victims. So she is actually discovered by the police through pawn shop records, and also through the use of this sketch, and it really looks a lot.
A lot of men had encountered her on their travels and had called in and said, I gave this woman a ride. And
yeah, and after the fact, I read an interview with one guy who was saying that he did pick her up, or he was offering to give her a ride, and he felt that she was so scary. He said that he was so fearful that he stopped at a gas station, told her to, gave her some money for cigarettes, and then locked his doors and drove away. Yeah. Because, and that's what I think that we need to make sure our viewers understand is that, yes, she's a woman and she was in a vulnerable position, she was a prostitute, but she was really terrifying. A lot of people that encountered her and her temper were struck by the rage that was inside of her, and that she was absolutely capable of murder. This wasn't like, oh, don't make me do it. Like, she became the serial killer that we know today. And then she was, so she was selling the possessions of the victims. That's how they started tracking her down, through a thumbprint on a pawn shop ticket. And then she was apprehended at a bar called The Last Resort.
Yes.
And she was initially, she was initially apprehended for an outstanding warrant. So it wasn't for murder right away.
Well, apparently they knew, they had a suspicion it was her, but they couldn't
tie her to it.
Yeah, so they wanted to get her in the station so that they could, have her there so she didn't escape and go to a different state or whatever.
Right, they needed to get her locked up in order for them to get...
Then it was like a race against time, because once they had her in custody, that you only have so much time before you have to release them, and they had to link her to the murders. They had to find the murder weapon.
Yes, and when we come back,
we're going to be talking...
Yeah, we're going to be talking about how exactly they linked Aileen Wuornos to the murder of these 7 men. So we'll see you then.